Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Well, it's technology, so we should develop technology.
Exactly, it's a
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I got interested in neuroscience in my second year, specifically, and then we started studying also statistics and quantitative methods in general in psychology, and that was also really interesting because I found out how much the whole science of psychology and generally all sciences depend on statistics, which depends on mathematics, which is why it's the queen of sciences. So they did a survey actually in my cohort. So what's your favorite subject in psychology? And out of 110 students, I was the only one who chose statistics. There was only one vote for statistics. Yeah, of course I stayed silent. Nobody knows this. I got really interested, but then it really got a bit like confusing for me because I had to choose a field towards like the third year. It was a 4-year degree, especially when I entered my 4th year. I was like, I have to choose it's either neuroscience or it's statistics because they seem quite different. So there was a struggle, and I actually didn't decide until I finished my degree, and then I worked in industry for 2 years and I hated it. And so I was like, no, I have to continue in academia, but I have to choose where to continue. So to settle the debate, actually, I thought, can I really, because I didn't know at the time, can I really like specialize in statistics and also contribute something to neuroscience? And so that's where I found out that it doesn't have to just be enemies. Maybe we can have some sort of a fusion. Some might understand the reference, some might not, so it's okay. But basically fusion, that's all, yeah. So for my master's, I applied to several places, and one of them was Manchester. So it was, the program was social research methods and statistics. And when I actually got introduced to that, it was really helpful because even a year before I came here, when I was like applying to different places, I saw that, oh, they're actually using R. So I hadn't heard about it. I'm just using SPSS. So this is R. What is this? What does this have to do with statistics? And I found, so I said it's better to train in before so I'm familiar when I start. And it was actually really interesting because it's much more flexible than just SPSS. And there's so much to do with it. And actually, when I came here, I realized that statistics, like in the UK in general, it actually is a broad field. It's not just statistics as in just regression in normal distributions and stuff. It's actually much more. So it includes data science, machine learning. These are like all statistical methods. And so I really found my like comfort zone, which is computational statistics. And just like, I'm pretty sure everybody here knows what computation is and what statistics is. It's basically using algorithms to enhance statistical methods. So my focus and my interest is like to contribute methodologically, not to applied research. So I got away from applied but my focus is that basically I'm focusing on methods that really benefit neuropsychological, and I'm in the social statistics department, so I also have to think about social sciences. They are somewhat different, but sometimes they tend to be converged in some areas. And my current PhD research, which I will not talk about, unfortunately, because my initial PhD focus was related to neuroscience. Neuropsychology specifically, but my current one is actually not, and that's basically I was trying to access data, but it was very difficult, especially because of the outcome of a certain election in the land of stars and stripes, which really cut funding to many data sets, and that was a problem. And so my current PhD, that I'm doing, so I'm doing research here in Manchester. Focus on integrating machine learning methods, for now supervised, so decision trees, forest models, into structural equation models, which is like a strictly statistical thing. And I'm also a special research student in University of Tokyo, and there it's similar, also about machine learning and statistics, but it's more math heavy. So it's more developing, let's say, other algorithms, other equations for estimation of parameters. And my initial PhD focus was actually an application of item response theory and computerized adaptive testing to enhance neuropsychological assessment. Of course, here when I'm talking about, these are psychometric tests in the sense that they're behavioral tasks, latent variables. So memory, intelligence, brain function are treated as latent variables that we're dealing with. And it's as opposed to physiological tests such as brain scanning or like, I'm pretty sure you are much more familiar than me. And so that was the focus. And the premises of the research is that the tests are old. The methods that they rely on are old, and there have been like better methods that are not utilized in neuropsychology for a reason or the other. And so they're developed on classical test theory, which is a bit of a, it's not really like bad or anything, but it can be enhanced. And so classical test theory basically observes score. Let's say we have intelligence here. So we have a test where we see somebody has scored 110 on an IQ, let's say. And so that 110 is true score plus some error in measurement. And that can lead to some problems, such as, in all psychometric tests that are used now, based on classical test theory, there's just one general score. And by the way, I will talk more about machine learning stuff as we progress forward. But I wanted to talk about this because this is really the current field of psychometric testing in neuropsychology. So this is like more or less very recent, actually, that started in 2023, 2024, people started to care about this. And so there's a single score, so somebody scores 110, another person also scores 110. They're treated as exactly the same, even if they have got different questions right and different questions wrong. And the assumption is that all items are exactly the same contributing, which we know is not the case. And so also the test is either entirely valid or entirely invalid. You cannot say this item is good, this item is bad. It's either the whole test is right or the whole test is wrong. And it's also sample dependent. So you're measuring the latent variable here in psychometric tests. Let's say whatever it is, brain function, memory, intelligence. It depends on this sample because your measurement of what that is, the thing you're trying to measure, the latent variable, depends on the scores of the sample. So you're really dependent on the sample that you have. And so reliability, for example, is again just based on true score and observed score. As you can see, it can be enhanced much better. So item response theory, which is the more, it's not that much more modern, but it has been introduced in the 60s by Rasch, and it has been used really heavily in education especially. And some other non-cognitive testing, but also you would find cases of application of IRT to cognitive tests in 2004, 2009. But they're very limited and they apply to a single test or like something. So, but the more general tests and more popular tests are really lacking still in the application of these methods. And so I was told that there are some people who like math more, some like neuroscience more, so I'll just make sure to. So we have 3 different parameter models for item response theory. So I'll say why item response theory is good. So let's say we have a test. And so it can have a 1 parameter, 2 or 3, depending on choice. So a 1 parameter is basically you have only the parameter B here, which you're trying to estimate. So you are estimating the latent variable theta here, of course, but B is really the parameter that you use to see how the item functions. So from the name, item response theory is focused on each contribution of each item in a test, not the whole test. So here you would have the probability of score X equals 1, so they score correctly on the item. Let's say we have an IQ test, and it's a test of general knowledge. So what's the capital of England, for example? So if they get it right, the probability that they get right is dependent on theta, their latent ability. Let's say, in this sense, their intelligence, and B, which is the item difficulty. So it depends on their latent variable ability and the item difficulty. And it's basically, item difficulty is what's known in factor analysis as loading. So basically, does the item load onto the factor? How strongly does it load? It's equivalent in this sense. And we will see in a graph how really that works. So a two-parameter model, we have A and B. And A is basically item discrimination. So basically, I'm sorry, I said factor loading. Item discriminability is the factor loading. This one is just the ease of the item. So how easy it is. And how we measure this, how easy it is basically what level of latent ability of, let's say, intelligence do they need to have a 50% chance of getting this specific item right, correct. And discriminability is basically how well or how sensitive it responds, the item responds to abilities in the latent variable. Again, for example, let's say intelligence in this case. And the third one is really depends on the type of the test. So you have C, which is an item for guessing, because if you have a test that's a multiple choice question, maybe the person chooses the right question just by chance. It doesn't really reflect their ability on that test. But if you don't really have a reason to include this, then that's why the most popular is the two-parameter logistic model. So these are, of course, important to say logistic models because you're treating a variable, a binary variable. So it's either they get it correct or incorrect. And this can be used also for like surveys even, because correct or incorrect, or you can say endorsement of this view or not non-endorsement. Let's say if it's a question about gun control and you're trying to test in a survey how conservative or liberal someone is. And so item, ease of item difficulty here, it would be how more conservative or less conservative do they have to be to endorse gun control. And discriminability would be how much does gun control tell us about let's say, how much conservative or how liberal someone is. And yeah, so the most important thing is the item characteristic curve. So you have a curve of a logistic model, which I'll show, for each item. And it's basically, it displays the relationship between what you're trying to measure and that specific item in a test. And unlike classical test theory, where it's deterministic, so you say this person has scored this, that, and that's it. In item response theory, it's really probabilistic. So you say, what's the probability that person A, let's say person I, whatever, gets the item correct depending on the difficulty of the item and also how good the item is in relation to the latent variable. And we have, if we have guessing, again, you have three things to look at. If not, you have two things. First of all is the steepness, which is the discrimination, and the location. So here, let's look at a graph. So we have three items. Let's say this one is asking the capital of the UK. This one is asks 1 + 1, for example, and this one is asking a variable. What's the synonym for, or like a word for elite, for example, let's say. So here, as we say, we have the steepness we have to look at, and also the location on the x-axis in this case. So here we have latent variable. It doesn't show because it says. Yeah.
So just from the last bit so far,
yeah.
we've got 3 different equations that can all be used to basically interpret results better and to rule out the difficulty of the particular question,
yeah.
The distinction between the options you have when it comes to that question, and then also in the third case to rule out the fact that they're guessing basically.
Yeah.
And then these statistical models, while they look more complicated on paper as maths, then give us more informed information about the output of our test.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's the output of each item in this case. So you have each item, how it functions, and as a general, it contributes to the overall test. But in item response theory, we don't really say, oh, this test is like this. We have like this item is like this, or this item is like that.
In a test like a survey, each item would be a question.
Yeah.
And then you look at how difficult each question is, and then you look at how different the answers that you put forward for each question are, and then you rule out the chance of them just guessing a question.
Yeah, an answer, yes.
An answer.
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, that would be correct.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Can I also?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Because some of the parameters that you told us about kind of sound like maybe they were based on the first version of the test that didn't have this in place. For example, probability, right?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
the difficulty of a single item.
Yeah.
Seems like it would be first calculated from the test.
Yeah.
Going in like this traditional.
Yes.
Form, right?
Yeah.
So it has to happen like this, right? So even if I made a new test and wanted to employ this technique,
yeah.
I would still need to collect my data from the test as it was.
Yeah, so you would be correct. To apply item response theory, you have to have the scores from a test. However, you need to have item level data. Most scores, which we will get to in a minute, one of the biggest problems with neuropsychological testing is that they provide data of just global scores. Person A scored 100. Yeah, but how did they score 100? Which one did they really, because it really matters, especially for different clinical. Let's say you're testing someone's memory. So do they have Alzheimer's? Do they have a brain lesion somewhere? It really matters whether they get the question of procedural memory right, or they get a question of working memory right, or like short-term, long-term memory right. So it really matters, but most tests now don't have this, so you would need item level data. You collect it, yes, and then you apply this. Yeah, perfect. Any other questions?
Yeah, so the item level data, if it was like the difficulty of a question,
yeah,
the example you gave, that's like numerically defined between like 0 and 1. Is that like a standardized thing, or is that kind of arbitrary when you make the test?
No, so you use maximum likelihood to know these parameters. It's an excellent question. So each parameter is estimated by maximum likelihood. So yeah, these parameters, you have to estimate them. You don't really collect them from the data. It's not an observed score. It's a parameter to be estimated in this case. And yeah, so basically let's say now we have 3 items. So question 1, question 2, question 3. And so this is the ICC, the item characteristic curves. We have the latent variable and probability of endorsement or correct response. So if we look at item 1 and the difficulty, so difficulty is decided by the location, whether it's further to the right or the left, let's say. So here, and these are, by the way, these are standardized latent variable scores. So when you're scoring -2, it doesn't mean you have -2, let's say, intelligence. Because that makes no sense. It's standardized, so it means you're 2 standard deviations below the average, which is 0. Here the mean is 0. So if we look at the first one, difficulty, so this is the 50% chance. And as we said, the difficulty is where do you need to be on the latent variable? How much do you need to score? Does your ability have to be for you to have a 50% chance of getting this correctly? So here, as we can see, to get a 50, it's like almost between like -1 and -2 to have a 50% chance. So it means even if you're 1 or 1.5 standard deviations below the average ability, you still have a 50% chance of getting this question right. which means it's an easy question to get right. So maybe that's the 1 + 1 question, probably. And then you have another item. So this one is more difficult. So you need to have more ability in terms of standard deviations to have a 50% chance. And this one is the most difficult. So you need to be 1 standard deviations, or like maybe even 1 and something standard deviations above average, so you can answer this question. So you have 50% chance of answering this question correctly. And then the steepness of the curve tells you about the discriminability. So basically how sensitive is your item to changes in levels of ability. So here we have, so this one is really steep, as we can see. So here, it's, if you have 1 standard deviations above ability and 2 standard deviations, so the difference between them, one you have, let's say, maybe 20% chance of getting it right. But if you're 2 standard deviations above, then you have almost 99% or like 90% chance of getting it correctly. So this one really discriminates between items, because even small changes in ability will reflect in probability of correct response or wrong response. So this one is also quite steep, actually, but not as steep as this one. So as you can see, as you move along, the chance increases, but it's more gradual, whereas here it's really steep. And if you, for guessing, if you need guessing, then you just look at the intercept, where the intercept. So here we start at 0. So a person, because we don't have multiple choice, a person would have 0 chance of getting it right if they have no ability at all. But if you have guessing, then you might start here. So let's say we have 4 multiple choices, then you start at 25. So even if somebody has 0 ability in that thing, not 0 average, let's say 0 ability, then they still have a 25% chance of getting the item correctly. And so, yeah, let's, for example, this one is just shows you, let's say this is item 1, and yeah, just shows you where it is. So this is the location of item 1 for ease, and this is the steepness of the curve. Yeah, so the advantages of why we would use something like that is the parameters are sample invariant. So you're testing the item, you're not testing an exact person per se. So you're seeing how your item is functioning. And that can be generalized to different tests. And also, scores are dependent on the set of items given in CCT. So if you change an item in CCT, then it's a different test. You can't do that. But in IRT, even if different people are tested on different set of items, then you still can compare them, because you know, you have information about the items. And CCT is deterministic, as we said. The other one is a probability of correct. So we don't say, oh, this person will score right, this got it wrong. It's a probability. And so IRT has information for each item, which is really good, because it allows test equating. So this is really important, because in neuropsychology, we have like 100, 200 tests for intelligence, 300 for memory, I don't know, like another 10, 20 for reaction speed. And this is really problematic, because let's say an applied neuropsychologist, when they see patients, they have so many tests to choose from, and some of them are reliable, some of them are not, but they also can't compare tests really, because this one has a reliability of that, this one has a reliability of that, but you can't really tell which one to choose. And so this is also important. So its measurement error differs in item response theory at different abilities. So you can say in this case, you can say actually the measurement error here at low abilities is really low, but at high abilities it's really high. So basically meaning this test, if it's administered to people with low ability, it really is accurate. But if you address this test to high ability people, then it's not really as accurate. It doesn't really discriminate between those people. And yeah, also it can also test item bias, which is also known as differential item functioning. So basically, the way you do that is that you control for the latent variable, and you test different groups, let's say ethnic groups or gender or whatever. So we have, so you test two people, let's say or like two groups, and then you see the probability of them getting the question right, the item right, after controlling for the latent variable. So you statistically control that, so you equate them and their ability. And sometimes, even if they have equal ability, they have different chances of getting the item right. And in this case, it would seem that the item is biased. And so it's not really, it doesn't apply in the same way to these two different groups. One group with the same ability cannot have the same probability. So that means the item is problematic. And that can be due to language, to culture, because an example of this is, so for IQ, there's a section of general knowledge, but if it's asking about something about snows and skiing, then a person living in a cold place, in a snow place, has a higher chance of getting it right, even if their intelligence ability is not better than someone else. So in this case, it would be biased. And this is really important because a lot of very, very popular tests and standard tests have not survived the bias, because you can see that there is bias by language, culture, or different things. And they also these things provide insight to theory, because this item actually seems to measure low ability or low memory. This one seems to only work if somebody has a very good memory. So you have more theory about what the wording of the item was and how that changes. And also, the assumptions are unidimensionality, so it can only have one dimension so you can't have two factors, although there are graded response models which you can use, and item independence, so items are not correlated. Yes?
You mentioned about how the items can be kind of more sensitive either at the lower or the higher end of the latent factor that you're measuring. Does that mean that this model could also be used to try and help avoid the very common instances of like ceiling effects and basement effects that we see in these tests?
Yes.
To try and bias towards kind of what you know about your sample going in, a priori?
Yeah. So that's a perfect point. That's actually one of the great uses of such tests, because here you can see that if you have a ceiling effect, it would show per item that, so everybody scores, like you have a normal distribution for other items, it's like, but for this one, there's a ceiling effect. So everybody seems to get this one right, or everybody seems to get that item wrong. Then it tells you something about your item, about this test. Of course, this in education is really important because they're trying to be fair and equal tests and for like different levels. And this is really good because you can actually compare different tests. You can even compare an intelligence test with a memory test, an intelligence test with a social policy test. It doesn't really matter because you have items. Of course, theoretically, that would be meaningless to compare these two, but statistically you can, which is really important if you're trying to measure. And you can take items from one test and say, oh, these items are really good, they function well, they discriminate, and then you take some other items, and that leads to standardized tests, which is really important. So you don't need to have 10 different tests for one thing. You have the best items combined in one single test. And but the most important is that it can facilitate computerized adaptive testing, because it basically gives you the mathematical rule or criteria for you to choose. And I'll talk about how. So computerized adaptive tests are basically tests that are adaptive to the individual. So this flowchart probably, this could explain it a bit better. So you start with a medium difficulty item. So basically, you know that this item, to have a 50% of chance, you need to have average ability. So you start with an item like that. And then you administer the item to the individual, so the individual answers. And based on their answer, whether they get it right or wrong, you estimate their ability, their latent variable, let's say their intelligence here. And so you select, after the next question, you don't just administer it randomly or like in a structured order. The next item you choose, it maximizes accuracy and information. So the one that minimizes standard error, so it's really good for measurement, and it also maximizes information, so it really has high discrimination at their current level. And if they get it wrong, the next question is wrong, then you choose an easier item because it says, oh, maybe they don't have that much ability. Let's choose an easy item and see if they succeed on that one. If they get it right, then you choose a more difficult item so they can answer. And then with each one, you update your estimate of their ability. And you repeat until your stopping rule, and you can choose your stopping rule, how it's met. So it's either fixed length, so you say only 10 items, don't apply more. Or you can have a standard error. So basically, for accuracy of measurement, you can say once you reach 0.04 of standard error, or like 0.4, whatever you set, then stop the test. And in this case, different individuals will have different set of items administered to them. But they, because of how item response theory works, they actually have been administered equal to their circumstances, to their ability, to their language, whatever. So, and this can really make tests efficient because it has been applied for some neuropsychological tests, and instead of 30 or 31 items, you can reach the same accuracy, standard error accuracy, with just 4 items, really, for someone. And neuropsychological tests are known to be very long and very tiring. So sometimes they're like 6 hours, 10 hours until you really reach, especially if the case is complex and you have like different sets. So and so I'll quickly move to more. So basically, what's the current psychometric test, where the current gap is, and recent work, what have they been calling for? Depending on, so on item response theory. I'll also just right after this move to a broader context, and I'll just mention some machine learning related stuff. So NIH Toolbox, the National Institute of Health Toolbox, they have developed a cognition battery that's it was developed based on IRT and CAT model. So you actually have an iPad, you don't need a pencil and paper and pencil anymore. And they've developed new tests using that. So, and it's really become a good standard because a lot of neuropsychologists can use it now. And the National Neuropsychological Network, this is really good for those who might want to use this item response theory for tests, because they initially received a much higher number than this, but then they started in 2019. Then in 2023, they received a further 8 million. So what they've done is basically they've collected item level data on the 50 most popular neuropsychological tests from more than 9,000 samples. And actually, their research that talks about the rationale for the design of this network is actually to collect item level data just so researchers can use item response theory on this data, so it can develop. So, and it's publicly available, so it's really good. However, as I said, that was one of the data sets that I wanted to use, but the situation in the US is not the most straightforward to work with regard to academia, so it can be a bit complex. And so it's really, you can see if you look at 2019, 20, 21, 23, 24, you can see more IRT and CAT models applied to neuropsychological tests. And I noticed when I was reviewing the literature, all the efforts were strictly in the US. I didn't see any even call for the same thing in the UK, which also has a lot of, as we know, load and stress on healthcare system, and making things more efficient and more accurate and providing more information and individualized could really be valuable. And even this could be a research, even collecting item level data is really valuable research itself without even applying anything. And this is probably the most important point. Neuropsychological tests, we rarely have big data sets that have like records of neuropsychological tests on many patients, many populations, and so on. Although recently there is, UK Biobank has some really good items. They have administered sets of some neuropsychological tests, but it really could be expanded more. And that one is also important because as neuropsychologists found the hard way, it's just translating tests is really a problem, and administering tests to someone who's not first language is also a problem. And as Reason Builder noted, they called for a revolution in neuropsychological testing. That they are both the ones that created this National Neuropsychological Network. So I really recommend reading the work. But I want to stop a little bit talking about the current state of psychometrics and hopefully talk about the future and what it can be. So to talk about the future is really important to get this debate between ecological validity and physiological validity. This is a century-long debate in neuropsychology. So tasks of, it started with like Wundt and Galton in so basic sensory reaction speed, there's some to measure intelligence, and then at the IQ time with Binet and Wechsler, you have more complex tasks and more verbal reasoning, general information, and so on to measure intelligence. So the first one was really interested in physiological validity. So this one reflects this area of the brain. This is for this area of the brain, but the other tests are more behavioral. It doesn't necessarily map into the brain. And actually in the paper of Reason Builder and who created the network, they talk about this quite a lot, about this debate and how it's good to, what way forward to settle this debate, because so while cognitive neuroscience has really developed a lot since these tests were established. These tests are the same tests. And we know so much more in neuroscience about the brain that we did when in the early 20th century. But the problem with neuroscience-based tests is that while they can be very accurate in terms of brain mechanisms, sometimes they're not as accurate in day-to-day tasks. So someone should not have a good memory. They do have a good memory for some reason, or intelligence, or so on. So yeah, basically it's a debate between ecological and physiological validity, because traditional neuropsychological tests, psychometric tests, can be valid, although they do report, neuropsychologists report the biggest problem in psychometric tests is that they lack ecological validity, ironically, which is supposed to be their strong suit. And as opposed to that, neuroscience-based measures are very good in physiological validity. They really reflect brain mechanisms very well, but sometimes they can not translate as well. And so the field is at a critical point right now. To move forward, we have to decide whether we continue with psychometric tests, more neuroscience-based precision, or we integrate some of the approaches. And yeah, so the thing that really has been called for is moving beyond digitalizing current tests. So item response theory and CAT models are really good, but you can contribute more if you move beyond just automating and digitalizing these current tests. You can contribute better, although that itself is also very valuable. So developing new tests, especially psychometric tests that reflect actually how the brain works. So when we're calling a test working memory, it should really reflect working memory should be involved in this task, not you're actually asking a question about something that turns out that in the brain, the working memory is not really working at all at that time. So, but you're still calling it working memory, which is a problem. And more relevant to this society is technology, because also in some of the recent papers, they do say that technology is probably the best field or track to follow to more advancement in these tests. So this can be ecological validity is really helpful if we have these wearable devices, because somebody can have this real-time measurement, physiological measurement, and behavioral measurement while they're actually going about their day, which is much more valuable than coming to somewhere without the context and doing some tests and then going back to their lives and turns out it's something completely different. And I mentioned this briefly, also big data analytics. So just if we get more and more, like the last 2 decades, there has been an explosion of big data, because if we have more data, then we can definitely find much more interesting patterns. Yeah, I should really wrap up. Okay, so practical next steps. Because I personally like to, when I'm listening to someone talking, I really want to get something practical out of it as well. So these are actually some research ideas that have been called for and that are really needed. So shift from low to high dimension, more context. So not tests that measure one thing, it's actually a test that measures, let's say, measures their behavioral task on something, but there's also a physiological test at the same time that's going on. So you basically combine different types of data. It's not just a linear test of, oh, they scored this, then this means that. It's much more complex. And also machine learning enabled pattern discovery is really valuable. So this is actually an example of a recent research. They used natural language processing to detect linguistic complexity changes in early Alzheimer's progress. And it turns out it was really, really accurate. And before that would have been years of research. Now with NLP, you can just do that very quickly. And in fact, you can have a coffee while it does it for you, so which is really good. And so Bayesian machine learning is a good approach to whiten the black box of machine learning. Graphical models also same as machine learning. Deep learning, I'll talk about this just briefly. So deep learning as a hierarchical brain model, you can actually simulate how the brain works using deep learning. If you try to simulate the whole brain, it would be really difficult, and it would probably be inaccurate because we don't really understand how the brain works anyway. But specific mechanisms or systems can actually be simulated. So you can have the layers of deep learning. So each layer relates to actually a hierarchy of brain functioning. So you can say, so just basic functioning and up to like language and then abstract thinking and so on. And you can ask the question, okay, so you can tweak anything with the neural networks. You can say, okay, so if this goes wrong in this system, what happens? And you can simulate it, and it can really provide valuable data. And the brain as Bayesian inference, so you can have perception and action as basically a probabilistic prediction. So given this, if this person has memory problems, has Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, whatever, what's the likelihood that they can do this thing or cannot do this thing? And deficits in your psychological functioning can be interpreted as false inference. So, and that's a Bayesian thing. So you basically say, oh, no, actually, this wasn't the case. And you can update it, basically. So phenotyping of cognition and pathology can really help machine learning methods to have more. Yeah, and probably the most important out of all of this is that the future is really multimodal algorithms would change how the whole field. So basically, you have an algorithm that can interpret psychometric tests, but at the same time can also interpret imaging. And for one individual, you would have psychometric test, imaging, and then you have this algorithm that interprets it for you. And this would really be valuable because it would connect them well. And just recommendations for like mathematicians and so depending on the field, what each one can contribute. And joint work and collaboration is always the best way to move forward. If we can get accurate simulation of the brain, so somebody developing the algorithm, the simulation, and neuroscientists and psychologists actually studying the mechanisms, that would be really good. these are some data sets that are really useful for, so UK Biobank is probably the best, and this one is also really good if you want to. And yeah, that should be it. These are general tips in general that I've found out in my PhD. So read as much as literature you can. You will find that there are so many gaps that you probably don't have enough time to fill all these gaps in research. Make use of AI as much as you can. This is really important. Although sometimes the university tells you not to, but it's really good. Don't make it do the work for you, but it can really help you do stuff. And I learned this the hard way. This is really important. The first year of my PhD, I didn't write anything. I was just, I'll read, I'll write notes, summarize. But actually, if you have a research idea, read literature. Once you have an idea, just once you read a paper, so create a structure for your paper. Okay, the abstract needs to include this, the literature review, the methods, it needs to include this. And once you read more literature, just write a paragraph, a sentence or two about that, and then you can redraft it. And if you're coding, it's better not to start from scratch, because there's probably someone who has already done some work and it's available on GitHub, so you might as well do that. And yeah, some good literature that talk about gaps in neuropsychology in general are these, especially that one, Paradigm Shifts Towards Digital Neuropsychology. You'll find that most of the things I talked about are like really mentioned here. And yeah, that's all. Thank you very much. I took more time